Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm Dan Bennett, the Antipreneur, and this is the Antipreneur Show. This is a very special episode. It's a little bit different than normal, but I got to sit down with someone super interesting doing some really incredible work in the world. And since we were creating video together anyway, I figured why not do it in an interview format and really take advantage of the fact that we had some time together. So I got to sit down with Terry Kaufman, who heads up an organization called IMACS, IMACS, that was started by his father. And over the last 28 years, IMACS has been offering various academic enrichment classes for gifted kids and teens that help them achieve success in their academic and professional careers. And we talk a lot about how they make math fun and how they really pull the most out of the way that kids think and set them on a path to do some pretty incredible things in their futures. And some of those stories are inside of this interview. So I don't want to make you wait too much longer. This is an interview with Terry Kaufman talking about IMACS and how they interact with parents and students and set them up for fantastic futures. Let's go. So I'm happy to be able to sit with Terry Kaufman and talk about something that I remember from my childhood is not a fun subject to talk about, and that is education, learning, and especially mathematics. So I'm being transported back to elementary school days as we lead in here. Can you just very high level, because we'll dive into some details, kind of break down a little bit of your program, what it's called, and kind of the angle that you take when it comes to educating, especially in mathematics?
Sure. So we're called IMACS, not related at all to the iMac computer. We actually had IMACS before Apple came out with their iMac computer, but IMACS stands for the Institute for Mathematics and Computer Science. We founded our company in 1993, but the history goes way back to the mid-1960s. A lot of the development work was done by my father and his colleagues, and I got involved with them in the late 1980s, beginning of 1990s. And we started out teaching after school, weekend, and summer programs for, initially it was geared for very talented students, all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. At the earlier levels, we had an enrichment program where we taught mathematical ideas and concepts in fun and engaging ways through stories, puzzles, games, using a lot of logic-based learning. It wasn't to do a lot of memorization. They get a lot of that in school. It wasn't to replace what they're doing in school, but to really enhance the kid that, maybe was not reaching their full potential because they were bored in school, or they were getting intellectually lazy because everything came easy for them. Or some kids that actually didn't think they were good math students, and turns out they were actually quite good thinkers. And it took us a long time to realize that we're much more about not so much teaching math as we're teaching mathematical thinking and logic and reasoning that transcends just math. It provides a gateway to learning many different things. And many of our graduates have gone on to a lot stay in the STEM area, but we've had doctors and lawyers and, business people, entrepreneurs. So, we started with 30 some students back in 1993. It was my father, two of his colleagues that had been involved with his development work. I had a background. I actually went through his math program when I was a kid in the 60s and 70s. So I actually could relate from what a student's point of view was. I never taught before we started IMACS. I went and I got my undergraduate and master's degree in math from Johns Hopkins University. Because of the background I had through my father's program, I was able to get both a bachelor's and a master's in the 4 years I was at Hopkins.
Okay. Yeah.
And it didn't require breaking a sweat. It was just like, this is how I've been learning for all these years. And most students in college come in thinking they're hot stuff because they're valedictorians of their class or they've done really well. Turns out they don't know the slightest thing about how to think in like a mathematician would think. They've just memorized a lot of facts.
Yeah.
And so when we started, we had 30 some kids, and over our 28-year history, we've grown, and we now teach thousands of kids a year.
Yeah, you've definitely given me some to unpack, which is awesome. The first thing that I kind of want to hit on is we're talking 30 years. So we're not talking about some new philosophy or something that you hope works. The other part of that kind of timeline is that I feel like we're starting to talk a little bit about legacy. And not just education. We're talking about something that was built from the ground up and has been refined over a period of time too. So I want to unpack a little bit of that kind of legacy vibe that I'm feeling, as well as I'm liking that it sounds like there's some unlocking that happens through a lot of the curriculum. I remember going to college. I have a mechanical engineering background, very low level. And I remember the first time I ever had a teacher that unlocked some stuff for me was in college. And it was just simplistically telling a story about how, being able to find the third leg of a right triangle could help you measure across a swamp. And I still remember that, even though I've been out of engineering forever, because I'm like, oh, you made it make sense and you unlock something for me through a story. So if you don't mind, how do you feel about that continuation of legacy, something that's been passed on and continues to this day?
So that's an interesting question. It's actually something that keeps me up at night a lot, especially through this pandemic, because it's been a challenge. I mean, as my father told it, he was a high school math teacher in Baltimore County, and ended up going to graduate school at Notre Dame. And the summer before his graduate school program started, he was in a special 6-week NSF-funded course at Notre Dame, where the professor decided to bring in a couple dozen high school kids from South Bend, Indiana, into this graduate level math class. And the professor started out teaching logic, which was not something, and it's still not really something that colleges teach, even undergraduate math majors, until they're probably junior year in college. But this professor started out teaching the foundations of logic, which is the underpinning of all modern mathematics. And then they went into more abstract kind of graduate level stuff. And as my dad told it, the high school kids were running circles around all these graduate students because they just got it and they were super bright. And it hit my dad that after all the studying he had done, if he had just learned logic back at a much younger age, how much mathematics could he have learned in a much more efficient and fun way? And so he had a vision that just said, if I can ever develop a curriculum from scratch, I would start with logic. And that's what he devoted his entire career to. In fact, in the last 4 years of his life, he was pretty ill with cancer. And I still remember him in the ICU. He was grading students' papers, even as he was that sick. And that's just, nobody can teach like he taught. But, and honestly, as I was growing up, I didn't see myself ever being a teacher. I just said, oh, I have this great math background. Computers were at the forefront then, and I took a few computer classes in college. Honestly, I wasn't all that enamored by them because it wasn't taught in the way that I was used to learning math, which was understanding things as opposed to memorizing a lot of arcane rules without the understanding. But I took a job at IBM, and they also taught me how to program there. I never really felt I was a great programmer, but I was certainly good. And but over time, when I left IBM, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And my father's program had been funded by the federal government from the mid 1960s till the early 1980s. And then he had lost federal funding. He moved back down to South Florida, which is where he had started all this back in the 60s, reconnected with people. The state of Florida and the Broward County Public Schools funded him for about 12 years. Being at IBM, I'd started in Virginia. I moved to Boca Raton, where they had the personal computer starting up. And that was, I got into management there. And when IBM was moving people out of Florida, I decided I was going to leave IBM, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I started getting connected back with what my father was doing at that time. He had taken on a colleague who was a computer scientist, and he was developing computer science curriculum for the bright kids that my father's program was teaching here in Broward County in the public schools. And I started reading the text that they had written. And I just was like, wow, I wish I'd had that when I was in, middle and high school. I would have been so much better at programming at IBM. And as IBM was moving people out of Boca Raton, I decided I was going to leave and wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I loved the computer science work. So I set up a publishing company. The computer language that they were using was called Scheme, which is what was developed at MIT. They were using it there for many years. So we set up a company called Schemers Inc., and we published a book called The Schemer's Guide, which was an introductory computer science course at the university level, but written for talented middle and high school kids. Had no idea what I was doing, but I read a book on how to publish. I printed a book. I took some of the money I'd gotten from IBM when I left, and I had like 3,000 books in our living room. And anyways, it just, I went to conferences and started selling some of these books. We made some nice connections. And then a few years later, my dad lost his funding and he was going to retire. And our oldest son was 2 years old. I told my dad he couldn't retire because his whole life's work would have been, who was going to carry it on. And I said, look, I don't know anything about teaching. I have a little bit of business experience at IBM as a manager, but not a lot. I had set up this publishing company already that we were selling some of this curriculum and software to. And I convinced him to, not retire, and his two colleagues. And then we formed IMACS. And it was tough. I mean, we had to work really hard. When you start with 30 some kids, it doesn't exactly pay the bills. And so the first few years were difficult. Fortunately, I had some money that I'd gotten when I left IBM, and two of my other partners were doing other work, and we would just kind of come to our center and do our teaching, and then we'd run things from home. And so now after 28 years of doing this, I mean, it took me about 3 or 4 months before I felt comfortable starting to teach, and then I guess it was just in my blood because my grandfather was a teacher, educator, my dad was, and it came pretty natural to me. And I still love teaching. I still teach some classes, but my father passed away in 2007. And since then, I've been thinking a lot about how does this program survive me, because there's nothing else quite like it. And that's what's so challenging when you have something so unique. It's hard to explain it to people. And it's not until a parent actually sees their kid coming to a class, having fun, learning, and the parents sit in the back of the room the first time, they get to see what it is that we're doing. Now it's all virtual though, but they used to come to a classroom. And so, it's something that I love doing. I could see what my dad loved it. In fact, when we first started, I used to get phone calls every month or so, and they'd say, they'd get passed on to me, and they say, are you Bert Kaufman's son? And I go, yeah. And they go, yeah, he was my teacher, and I'm like having a midlife crisis in my 40s now, and I just want to let him know how much difference he made for my life. And now we have second generation kids doing IMACS classes, and I get the same thing. I mean, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, one of our students I hadn't seen in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was in town for a Panther hockey game. I guess they were in the playoffs this year. And he said, I'm sitting at a hotel. I'd like to stop by and say hi. I work in DC. And he stopped by, and he works for some government agency. Said if he told me, he'd have to shoot me. So he couldn't tell me what he was doing. But he said whatever he was doing, he was just amazed at how the ideas that he learned at IMACS still help him. So, yeah, I mean, if you go to our website, we have a whole page of success stories of kids that have been with us for years. I can tell you lots of that. And I can tell you that, it's one of those things that like I said, it keeps me up at night, because I feel like there's so much to offer. And there are a lot of kids out there that don't know any better, and they get turned off from math because honestly, it's probably not taught much differently than when you were in elementary school or when I was in elementary school. I mean, it's still a lot of, I still remember, they thought you were good at math because you could be the fastest one to multiply two numbers together.
Right. Yeah. Those were the days, right? Right. I absolutely appreciate you diving into some of the history and lineage. There's nothing quite like a family story. And I love knowing that there's been a proverbial and possibly literal torch passed through education. And that's super cool. One thing that really excited me about that portion you just shared was kind of the entrepreneurial underpinning of scratching your own itch. And it got even a little bit more interesting to me, because not only was it scratching your own itch in your father's case and in your case, you were both reaching into the past and scratching an itch that had already gone by saying, man, if I had this, wow. And the way that you solve that problem, even though you can't change the past, is to help people into the future. And I think that's so cool how there was a scratch your own itch type of underpinning there. A mutual friend of ours, Rachel, gave me a short little story I wanted to share real quick and just get your feedback on it. She was telling me how the program is cool. And that's one of my favorite parts that she shared with me is it's a math program that you can say the word cool with. And that right there tells me a ton, because again, I know that there's fun and story involved when someone says that math is cool. She said, my kids are in it and it's life-changing. No joke. My 17-year-old hated math so much in 4th grade. We actually pulled her out from it because we didn't want her to hate math forever. Mm-hmm. She took IMACS classes and fell in love with math so much so that she finished BC calculus and as a 10th grader, or finished as a 10th grader, and is going to be a math major. Life-changing. I know from having math be a pretty important part of what I thought was going to be career path early on, how much it means to start enjoying math as opposed to hating it. You want to chime in on that? What it's like to see a student go from like it being pulled from math so they don't hate it forever, all the way to the point where they might be considering going into it possibly forever.
Yeah, oh boy, I can tell you lots of stories, but so I equate learning logical thinking and reasoning to like learning a foreign language. It's so much easier when you're younger to learn that than take an adult and it, it's too late by then. When we were teaching in-person classes, which we did for the first 27 years. The last year has certainly been unique, and I'd be happy to talk about some of the challenges with that. But the first 27 years, we could never have grown our operation, or I guess you want to call it a business or a learning program, if we didn't really deliver what we said we did. And parents would call up and say, my kid's good at math, but they're getting a B now because they're not interested, or math is so easy, they hardly do any work. And what is it that you have? And I would spend an hour on the phone trying to describe how we make math fun, mathematical thinking and logic. But I would constantly say, just bring your child in for a free 1-hour placement class, which is an actual class. There'll be other kids in the room that have never been here before. You'll get to sit in the back of the room, see exactly what we do. If you don't like it at any time, you can just leave at the end. If you don't want any information, that's fine. But if your kid enjoys it and you want to talk to me afterwards, I'm happy to give you some feedback on how your child did and where they would place in our program. Because unlike school, we place students based on their ability, not their age or their grade, and we can take them very far. So if your child's maybe behind a little bit in math, maybe they'll be in with younger kids. And if they're really strong, they'll be with older kids. But, so I would love on those sometimes on Saturday mornings, you'd see the parents dragging their kids into the lobby, crying they don't want to be here. And the parent really couldn't explain to them what they were going to be doing. They would always say, "Are you coming to take a test?" And I'd say, "No, it's not a test. Why would you say that? It's so much more fun than a test." And they drag them in, and you'd see the kids almost in tears sitting at the table, the parents in the back. And I would just start out my class, say, "Welcome to IMACS. Have you ever seen one of these things before?" And it's this it's a little board that's got 4 squares on it, different colors. Have you ever seen it? We call them mini computer boards. Have you ever seen one of these? And no, I said, "Well, there's a secret code on it. And once you learn the secret code, we can do some interesting things." And then I do a couple little things. And then I ask my first question. All these hands are just flying up. And the kid that was crying, they're no longer crying. They're thinking and problem solving. And then we go through an activity. And then I say, "Oh, now we're going to play a game." And it's a logic-based game. And I teach them the game. And you can see just how competitive they are and how much fun they're having with it. And then at the very, excuse me. And then at the very end, we do a little mystery where we have a secret number and I got some clues to help them solve it. And the kids are just so engaged. The class goes by that fast. And at the end, the kids are begging their parents to sign them up. The parents come up to me, and the ones that I can tell, they'll come up and say, "Oh, I wish I had this when I was a kid." And those parents I know are going to be with us forever, because once you see it, and you see your kids excited, you're like, "Why can't my kids be like that all day long in school? Why is it only this 1 hour thing a week or whatever?" So, that's I love turning around those kind of kids that naturally didn't think they'd want to do more math, or they hated math, or, other stories I love is when a parent would come in with a son and a daughter, and they would have signed up the son for the placement class, and their daughter's carrying a book under her arm. Maybe she's a year younger. And I'll say, "Well," I said, "Is your daughter going to put?" "Oh, no, she's not a math person." I'd be like, she's only in first grade. How do you know she's not? And I say, "Well, what's your name?" And she'd tell me her name. I'll say, "Look, I'll make a little name tag for you. And if you want to join in, just join in." And they always just jump right in. And by the end, the parents are going, "I didn't think she could do that." I'm like, "What are you doing?" There's so many women that, girls that end up not pursuing STEM because that's how their parents see it. And,
perception is everything. And that's not just a saying, right? I'm starting to see a pattern. So your father scratched his own itch and then said, "I wish I had that as a child." You said the same thing. Now some of the parents are seeing that same light bulb moment of, "Man, I wish I had this." And the cool part about that is because these adults all wish they had something, the future generations will. And I think that's super cool. And some of the work I do, helping people tell their stories and get on camera, get comfortable on camera, and start to be able to develop video content as well. There's all these light bulb moments, and those are my favorite, because oftentimes, like you're saying, what's in there is in there already. It's just being unlocked. So it's not that we're changing you into a math person. We're unlocking the fact that you might just already be one. And I think that is so stinking cool. Do you have another short success story that you could tell? Maybe keep the name a secret, but tell about a student who had a huge pivot.
There's a couple interesting ones, but one that comes to mind, I use her first name. Anyways, her name was Crystal. And she was, I think, a 3rd grader when she started with us. And this was early on, before I had much experience. And my dad was teaching her. And again, we place students by their ability. So she was in a class with mostly 2nd and a couple 3rd graders. So she wasn't one of the strongest kids, and she was a little spacey, a little bit, not the typical kind of kid that we would have. Her mother was a nurse, and it was a challenge for them to afford our program, but her mom, I could see that she saw it was a priority. And I remember going up to my dad one day and saying after class, do you think this program's going to help Crystal? And he looked and he said, well, I don't think she'll be a mathematician one day, but this kind of thinking is definitely going to benefit her. And I can tell you that for sure. And I still remember that she's not going to be a mathematician one day. And probably, had to be at least 14, 15 years. And this girl, she did stay with our math enrichment program all through elementary school. She took a little bit of time off in middle school. She came back in high school and actually did some of her university level courses, but she wasn't strong enough to finish any of them, but her mom still believed in it. Fast forward about 15, 16 years, I was at one of our other centers going in to teach a class, and some parent shouted to me, "Hey, Mr. Kaufman," she said, "I don't know if you remember me or remember my stepsister, Crystal." And I said, "Yeah, I do remember." I didn't know she had an older stepsister. I said, "Whatever happened to Crystal?" And she goes, "Oh, she just graduated from Cornell with an engineering degree, and she's going to Carnegie Mellon for a master's in information technology." And it like flashed back to when she was a third grader. My dad said, "She's not going to be a mathematician." I said, "Well, she really didn't become a mathematician, but she went to an Ivy League school and she did particularly well." So I love that kind of story. Yeah. And she was a type that a kid like that made me realize that our program's not just for the most talented kids, that we could take a kid like that. And I guarantee you that our program made a big difference for that girl. There's no doubt in my mind. Yeah. But then we had other kids, like there's a kid named Peyton who I met him at a back to school event when he was just turning 4. He was a month before he was 4 years old. And it was at a private school where we were doing some teaching, and the mom had twin girls in their stroller, and then Peyton was there, and she had no idea what IMACS was. And she said, what's IMACS? And I said, "Oh, this math and computer science program." She said, "What?" She said, I said, "It's for, generally for bright kids." She said, "Well, my son here, he knows a lot of math." And I'm looking at this little kid, how old is he? "Well, he's turning 4 next month." I said, "Wow." I said, "Well, when you say he's good at math, does he add and subtract?" "No." "Oh yeah." I said, "Hey, Peyton, what's 7 plus 5? And he says 12. And I'm like, "Wow, what's 11 minus 4? He says 7, without any finger count. This is a kid not even 4 years old. And I go, "Oh my God." I said, he's definitely, he could be ready for our program today, but he's just so tiny. I said, I can't imagine him sitting in a classroom with kids so much older than him right now. Here's my card. Let's communicate. I'll give you some other ideas to do for a few years till maybe he's around first grade, and then we'll place him in the right level." And basically, I helped mentor that family for many years. This kid ended up, he has multiple inventions, multiple patents. He's been on the Ellen DeGeneres show multiple times. He was a Young American Scientist of the Year with 3M, a $25,000 scholarship. He got invited to the White House Science Fair when Obama was there around 2014, I think, somewhere around there, 2000, I don't know, somewhere around there. And or maybe it was a little bit before that. And there's a video of Obama speaking to Peyton, and after he talked to him and stuff, as he's walking away, he looks back, he says, "I'd like to buy some stock in you," and this kid's now, he just finished his freshman year at Stanford, and he's majoring in physics and maybe computer science. And this is a kid that started, he would have been successful with or without IMACS, but when I talked to his parents, his father, the first time I met him, he says, you guys walk on water in our house because, you just given us so many ideas for opportunities for Peyton that he wouldn't have gotten. Yeah. And so, yeah, And I can go
Yeah.
on and on. I got
I'm relating so strongly to so many of these different points in my own work. So just so you know, that's why I keep bringing up my own stuff, because man, I am seeing so many things like facilitation. So there's oftentimes where I've been pigeonholed into like, oh, video guy. And I'm like, yes, I'm a professional videographer and I've done film, blah, 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 but it's just a vehicle. It's just a thing to take that story where it's going. So it sounds like not only are you unlocking potential and developing potential in people, but you're also facilitating. And I think that's so powerful because it's almost like scouting. Not that you're going out trying to find all the smart, little 3, almost 4-year-olds, but the fact that there's this availability where if there's an interest sparked or a meeting that happens, there could be facilitation, and that's powerful.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these kids, that's the other big challenge is the kids don't appreciate what they're learning when they're learning it, because we're teaching them how to think in a way that probably doesn't benefit them so much in elementary or middle or high school, because everything's so rote in those in that way. When they get to college, though, they really get it. And I mean, right before the pandemic, I remember I got an email from a parent one morning, said thank you in the subject line. I opened it up. Love getting emails from parents that say thank you. And she says, you probably don't remember me, but my son did IMACS, like 10 years ago when he was in elementary school. We couldn't fit it into middle and high school, but he's now a sophomore at Colgate University in New York, majoring in mathematical economics. And he wrote to me last night and he says, please contact IMACS and thank them, because I got 100% on my number theory exam and it was just like what I did at IMACS in elementary school. And I wrote back, I said, oh, that's, you made my day. I said, I just wish it had taken your son 10 years to realize that you were making such a big difference for him. And, it's just tough. And even one of my partners, when his daughter hit, like she took calculus in high school, and she came home one day and she says, Dad, I thought you guys made up all this stuff. It was like, she had no idea that what she was learning was really going to benefit her. And it's just, and I can tell you from my own experience, when I got to college, and I didn't have everything that IMAX had, but I had a lot of the more advanced stuff. And, I remember at Hopkins, I had a fight with my advisor to let me into a very special freshman level course called Honors Advanced Calculus. There were only 7 students in the class, and I couldn't really answer all the kind of questions he was asking me because it was mostly a lot of rote stuff that I just hadn't memorized, but I knew how to think about it. If I had enough time, I could have solved it. Anyways, I convinced him to let me in the class. The class was all proof-based, so it was all logic. And in that class, there happened to be 3 kids that were 16 years old, 15 and 16-year-olds that were from Baltimore, that were part of this Center for Talented Youth program, which is one of these national talent search programs that have now evolved over the country, but it got its start there by a psychologist, Julian Stanley. He would bring kids in to Baltimore for a weekend, and they teach them all of Algebra 1 in a weekend, and then they teach them all, and they were just super accelerated, but they hadn't been taught to think, just to memorize, or they were good at the kind of stuff like that. And 3 of the kids were from that program, much higher IQs than me, brilliant kids. One of them was actually the professor's son. And the first exam was all proof-based, which, that's what mathematicians do. They conjecture things, and they use the kind of logic that we teach, the formal logic, to actually prove things are true or not. And it's different than here's a theorem, just apply it, or, plug in the numbers and use this formula. They actually prove things. Well, the first test was all proofs. I aced it. I got a 95 on it. The next highest grade was like a 57 in that class. And I was like, how can these kids are so much smarter than me? How is it they can't do that? And it took those kids that were definitely much brighter than I was 2 or 3 years to get to the point where I was as a freshman. But it was because of all that background that I had. And that's how, even with the pandemic last year, a student of ours at Carnegie Mellon, and she impressed her professor so much there, he invited her to his graduate level seminar. And then he wanted to know, how does she know all this stuff? And she told him about us. And he says, well, I want to talk to them. And this pretty well-known computer scientist from Carnegie Mellon spent 45 minutes in a Zoom call with me. and was just blown away by what we do. And he said, listen, I'm not in the admissions department, so I can't help you really get your students accepted at Carnegie Mellon. But if you get us other students, do send them my way, because I want more students like her.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
That is so cool. It's so cool. And it's not to get too fluffy, but I kind of have to. We're back to life changing. And that facilitation can so change someone's life, not only, find talent that already exists and develop it, but turn people on to new ways of doing things that could make them, be able to outperform. I don't want to say competition, but you know what I mean? So I definitely want to get into the pandemic and the shutdown. I'm sure the word pivot came into your world, like it rushed into all of ours as well. But before we're done, I also want to make sure that we do kind of a literal walkthrough of what it's like if a parent saw this conversation, to get into that free class and to get a taste and to do all those things. So make sure that I don't forget before we're done. But let's talk a little bit about the shutdown and kind of how you've had to shift up how you're doing things.
Yeah. So we're not a large company. And when the pandemic hit, it was an existential crisis for us, because all of a sudden we had over 1,000 students that were coming to our centers after school on weekends locally. Plus we did have some online programs that were for higher level. We had university level courses. We also had a very advanced middle and high school math program that was online. In fact, that's what our friend Rachel, her older daughter had done that. That's because she lives in out west, and so she couldn't have done local stuff. But we got our team together, and we basically said, okay, what are we going to do? There's no way who knows how long this is going to last. And nobody had any experience filming or doing I never even heard of Zoom before this. I'd used WebEx for a couple of meetings, but I was thinking, so we figured out, okay, let's make a hybrid type version of our program. So part of our lessons that we taught in class, like every week, the kids would come for an hour and a half or 2-hour class, and they'd have a little bit of homework to do, and they have some worksheets, and they do stuff in class, play games and stuff. So we said, maybe we could take part of the in-class stuff and just make like 5 to 8 minute short videos of a teacher standing at a whiteboard, teaching that portion of the class where the kids aren't really interacting too much. I mean, most of our classes are very much involved in, the kids are doing all the thinking, and we're just setting up we're introducing the situation, the novel, either within a story or a puzzle or game. So we'll do that part in a video. And then we'll have some pretend students in the room. Sometimes we'll say, okay, what do you think the answer is? And then there'll be a pause. And then the student in the classroom will shout out an answer. And then, so it kind of make it seem like we're teaching. And then some of the worksheets that the kids would do in class, we would put those online. And, when you think about it, we have 5 full years of what we call our math enrichment program, which is the one where most parents that might be listening to this that have younger kids would be interested in. 5 years of curriculum, 32 weeks at each level. And there were over 1,400 worksheets that were always just printed out, and kids would work and we'd manually grade, that we had to then convert into online, digital, interactive self-grading. So we were starting that, we were doing the filming, and then we had to create an environment where the kids could come into Zoom and our teachers could do what they do on a whiteboard and have the same devices and things. And, one of my partners here, business partners, he's a genius when it comes to computer science. And he's the one that developed all of our computer science curriculum. And he had been developing all this middle and high school math curriculum online. And there were a lot of a lot of overlap between what we did in middle and high school online with what we were doing in our math enrichment. So some of that code was written, and within a couple of weeks, he had developed an environment where we could play the kind of logic games that we played in our regular classes. And basically honestly, our teachers were just totally stunned that in 2 weeks we could have something like that. So COVID hit. It was right around our spring break week. We took a 2-week hiatus to get all that going. And then we were off to the races. We were filming, creating an environment where the kids could do things. And I can tell you in March, April, and May in 2020, it was not an ideal situation. I mean, it was just everybody was in emergency mode. But I'm almost certain that our emergency mode was still heads and shoulders above what the schools were doing, because I could only imagine what some of those teachers were. So and then we got through that. And then over the summer, we started refining what we want to do and make it as close to the experience the kids had when they came to our program. And I have to say, I actually think the only classes that I teach now are these initial placement classes, which is the free class where a parent with a younger kid, typically elementary school age, can see what it's all about. Like the story I told you about the kids getting dragged in, I have to do it online. And the only reason we've stayed in business all these years is because when a parent sees that class and a kid comes, we enroll about 65, 70% of those kids, which is not because I'm a great salesperson or our team is. We don't know how to sell anything. We're just really good at what we do, which is teach. And we let everything else fall in place. And it was last July was the first time that we had everything in place for me to actually teach one of these placement classes. Because earlier we were just, like I said, we were in emergency mode, just getting through the school year. And in July, I taught my first class. I was super, super nervous. You got to realize I've been doing something for 27 years the same way. I could do it in my sleep. And all of a sudden now I had to learn Zoom and I had to learn how to do it all and use these tools. And anyway, the first class I taught was 4 kids. One was from California, one was from Washington State, one was from Alabama, one was from Florida. First, I had practiced on my wife, by the way, so I made sure that she could tell me what I was doing well and not. But the way we set it up, too, by the way, which is also different, the kids would come here on a Saturday morning. They wouldn't know what they were coming for. So now what we did is we created 3 very short videos. So if you're a parent and you want to even see if this is even something your kids might like, you sign up for this free placement class. But before you come to the placement class, you get a pre-placement class activities for your child. So there's no charge. It takes 20 to 30 minutes. A child will watch a short video. There'll be a few exercises to do. They'll watch another short video, a few more exercises, and watch one more video of the game that we're going to play in the placement class, and does a couple little things with that. And then says, okay, now you can sign up for a placement class. So if a kid didn't like that, no harm, no foul. They don't proceed.
Yeah.
Takes them 20, 30 minutes. Now, when they come to a placement class, so the first one I taught, they'd already done that. So I didn't have to do all the introductory stuff. I just jumped right into some interesting problems, which was always a problem with our placement class. As good as it was, I had to spend 10 or 15 minutes before I got to too much good stuff.
Yeah.
I just jumped right into the good stuff. So I teach this class. Honestly, it went better than I could have imagined. I was super excited that I thought it went well. And then I do a little Q&A with the parents at the end, and they're asking me questions. And one parent says, well, what are the long-term benefits? Of course, I spent a couple of minutes talking about some of the success stories and how it worked. And one parent said, well, are you always going to, are you going to stay online? We said, yeah, we are definitely going to stay online. And then one parent said, can I say something? I said, sure. She said, everything you just said is 100% true. She says, because I was one of your students in 1993 when you started. I live in Alabama now. I'm so excited that my daughter can do IMACS classes.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's your last name? And she told me her last name. I swear to God, my jaw about hit the floor. And everything just flashed back into my head about her, because I wasn't my dad was teaching her in the very first year we taught, and she was like the teacher's pet. She was so good and so smart, and she went on and got an undergraduate degree in math. She went on and got a PhD in economics. She's a professor at a university in Alabama, and she just went on and on. I think we have a video on our site that taught a little bit of when at the end when I was wrapping it up, and she was just talking about how much better she was at everything because of IMACS, and how it saved her from all the boredom in school of all the kind of stuff. So so that's really when I knew that this could work. And the other part that was always a challenge for us is, how do we grow beyond South Florida? And we had a few local centers, couple in North Carolina and St. Louis, Connecticut, but it was really hard for them. And it was hard for us too, because, we're teaching in a facility where we have to pay rent, 24/7, 7 days a week, and 24 hours a day all year. And we were only teaching a few hours a week. Maybe we teach 3 hours each afternoon and a few hours on Saturday, and we're paying for all this space. And it made us need a lot of kids to support it. And when COVID hit and we realized that this wasn't going to just be something that was going to be back to normal by the fall, we said, we're just going to stay online. We had a downsize, which, it's not pleasant to deal with that kind of stuff. But
I can imagine. I appreciate you sharing that with me, because I have a pivot of my own. And in the moment, it's like, whew, I got sick of hearing my friends tell me how resilient they know me to be. Because I'm like, yeah, that's great, but things are not great right now, And then looking back, it was a phenomenal time in life last year. But in the moment, of course, it's like, wow. So I encourage a lot of my clients that I work on with story development and stuff to lead with conflict and show a little bit of dirt under the rug. So if there's one thing that we could share with a viewer, that is a challenge right now. So you pivoted, you got up and running virtually. It sounds like you've refined the virtual experience, and I'm sure continued to do so. What's currently still a pain point for you that we could maybe share with the audience and let them know, what you're up to and what you're trying to accomplish currently?
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge for us is basically marketing our program and getting people to try it out. There's so much, when we started, it was easy. You ran ads in the local newspaper or in the magazines, and now nobody looks at those anymore. And so, there's two things. One is really getting our story out there and having people, to me, I think it's like child abuse. If you have a kid at home that has possible potential for something like this, or maybe they're totally bored in school, or maybe they're not doing well in math, and you hear that, in 20 to 30 minutes, you could find out if your kid maybe your kid is a good thinker. It takes 20 or 30 minutes. If you don't like it, don't bother to come. If your kid hates it, just shut off the computer. But who wouldn't devote 20 or 30 minutes of your kid's life? You can be cooking dinner. You don't have to be doing it. Just put the kid in front of the computer and let them tell you what they think.
Yeah.
And more times than not, the kids are going to say, I want to do this. Sign me up, So it's very frustrating for us. Look, when COVID hit, we went from 1,200 students. At least more than half of them dropped out. And many of them had already paid us for the next session. We run 8-week sessions during the year. So there's 4 of those. So the last session, many of them already paid. We just kept refunding money. We were hoping they would stay with us. Some parents, well, we'll come back when you're back in person, but I might lose my job and stuff. So financially, it was really, really tough.
Yeah.
When the PPP thing came out with the government, I was all over that. yeah, the minute I was up at 5 a.m. applying for it, and then it was, I don't know if you how much you know about that, but
Yeah,
it was bad. I
quite
mean,
a bit.
I've been with Bank of America for 20 some years, and literally nobody could tell me anything. I was writing to our congressmen, I was writing to our senators. I mean, I just was not going to let us fail. And I was one of the first businesses around here that actually got funded, which was great because I didn't know what I was going to do with my staff. I wouldn't have been
Yeah.
able to afford to keep them. And, you know, and then of course, you know, we, we've been the best tenants any landlord could have. We were the best, you know, company with our copy. We were doing 60,000 pages a month, printing these worksheets for all of our students everywhere. And it's funny, as soon as something, you know, not our fault, not their fault, but something came up, it's like nobody wants to help you, you know?
Yeah.
And a lot of that falls on me. And you know, also 2020 was a tough year. I mean, a couple of our staff members got very ill, and
Yeah.
had to stop working, and that was hard. So, you know, getting our word out, just getting a parent to say, okay, let me just see, because I can't explain it. And I
Yeah.
guarantee you, if you saw it, it wouldn't match exactly how I'm describing. It's just really hard.
Yeah.
And then the other part is, you know, finding teachers to teach our program, because it's not easy to teach our classes. Fortunately, all of our instructors, part-time instructors, stuck with us, or most of them did. So we've been fortunate there. But as we start to grow, we're going to need to get instructors in California, or maybe in India or in UK, where they can teach at different time zones, which, you know, that opened up a big door for us. But training teachers is, you know, it's challenging, because
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people that have undergraduate degrees in math or computer science can't pass the tests that we give them just to interview them. And the test is like a 2-hour test of questions that we give third and fourth graders in our program.
Yeah.
And they can't, they're not detail oriented enough. So,
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing both of those sticking points with me and with the audience. It sounds like, and I'm not deducing the severity of the challenges you have by any means, but it sounds like awareness is a big part of what might help facilitate some positive change in the future for IMACS. And I'm happy that you gave me some of your time for me to be able to use my platform to hopefully bring some of that awareness, as well as have some conversations about, you know,
sure.
what's going on, what are you trying to accomplish. And I've found I'm really careful about giving advice. I've always been that way. I feel a lot of responsibility anytime I do give advice. So if it's about video and storytelling, I'll give advice all day long, up to a certain level for sure. Other things, I just like to get people to think differently, but not give advice on what I think they should do. But recently, especially since, in my case, losing everything last year and starting over and having a different mindset about how I'm going about my work, I started just telling everyone what I'm up to, what I'm trying to accomplish, and where I'm headed, even if something hadn't been started or built yet. And I tell you what, I've gotten to a point now where I feel comfortable giving that as advice. And just so you know, I'm not giving that to you, I'm giving it to everyone. Talk about what you're doing, share it with everyone. Even the local grocery store clerk that you see all the time. Hey, Dan, how you doing? You know, doing pretty good. I found this sticking point where a lot of people are uncomfortable getting on camera. So I created this free community where people can just like do test videos in a loving environment. That's been fun. The sun's out today. I'm getting some vitamin D. So that's kind of nice, you know, and I just slip in those couple of sentences, even if it's just a casual, how you doing conversation. And that has opened so many doors in the last 8 to 10 months for me. So I appreciate you sharing what you're up to, what you're trying to accomplish, and what some of those sticking points are, so we can make even more people aware. Now, we talked about, you know, a little bit of heavy stuff. We talked about pivoting. We talked about, you know, the kind of drag that 2020 was for sure. Let's end on a little bit brighter note. What are you excited about for the future, not just of IMACS, but of education, and maybe how cool this virtual thing could be to reach people outside of Florida?
Yeah. Well, I certainly, parents that I speak to all the time, I always say the first time my wife and I have been glad we were empty nesters last year, because I can't imagine having kids at home during the pandemic. It had to be really challenging. But with challenges like that, I mean, you know, from our standpoint, I actually feel like the sky's the limit for us if we can get our message out there, because I've taught kids from Uganda, Lebanon, UK, Australia. The world's really, the internet brings people together, right? I mean, the whole world is now just a Zoom meeting away.
Yeah.
You can meet anybody. And the technology will continue to improve. And even for us, you know, there were, I can see, I mean, so we're excited about a lot of things. I mean, I'd like to think that we're going to be able to bring this program to more students. I would like to find some sponsors that maybe for underserved students. Like, in fact, that one student I told you about, Peyton, he got all this money because of the awards he got. He set up a foundation. He actually, one summer, he donated $5,000 from his foundation to bring underserved kids into our summer camp program.
Wow. Yeah.
And his parents have also helped provide some scholarship money for some underserved kids. So over the years, I mean, I've always tried to find a spot for kids that really couldn't afford our program. It's tough because we do need to pay our bills and stuff, but there are things that we offer. So we talked about like the elementary school curriculum, which is these math enrichment classes, but we also have these higher level classes in middle school. And middle school, we have a math curriculum that in 3 years, kids from 6th through 8th grade can cover all of middle school and high school math, from pre-algebra through pre-calculus. Here in South Florida, the Broward County schools are using that program, which is funny because that's a program that they cut my dad's budget for in the early 90s because they lost funding. But now we came back with an online version. So the very top, like 200 kids in middle school are doing this program. It's called EMF Math, Elements of Math Foundations, emfmath.com. And we've kept the costs very low. There's no teacher involved. We took the teacher out of the equation. So everything is the kids just work through it. These kids in middle school that finish in 9th grade are going dual enrolling at the University of Florida in Calc 1 and Calc 2, running circles around all the college students. In fact, the chair of the math department, Dr. Knutson at UF, drove down here a couple of years ago to give a lecture to these kids. He couldn't believe they were middle school kids that knew more math than his undergraduate students. So, you know, I mean, I know that for most students, it's important to be in school, in person. A program like ours, I think, actually works better online. There's less distractions. Kids are more relaxed. They're in their home. If you get a kid that's acting up in a class, that every once in a while we'd have, you know, everybody would be distracted. Now you just press the mute button and they disappear. Yeah. So I'm excited about what can happen. I mean, I am not saying that we're out of the woods yet. I mean, financially, it's been hard. And look, I'm very much, I can tell you, out of my comfort zone doing something like what we're doing here. I've never done something. I much prefer having the parents see what we do and then talk about their child. I can give them, and that's the other thing, even if a parent wasn't interested in signing up, come to the free class. I'm happy to give you feedback on your child. And honestly, some of the feedback I give, parents are amazed, or sometimes I'll give them, I know a lot about other things that are out there, resources. I write a lot of recommendations for students when they're applying to colleges. And so, it's never been about the business for us. I didn't know I had it in my blood, but it was there. And I love talking about what we do here. I mean, to the point, I hope some people will find it interesting and come check us out.
Yeah, I guarantee that will be the case for sure. I love that the history, the past, the current ability to adapt on the fly, develop online curriculum, pivot so quickly, and the future of technology and remote learning, those three things can kind of come together into what I would like to call some sort of rocket fuel for IMACS into the future, because man, oh man. Now, being a storyteller, a lot of the stories you've told me today are a little bit more palpable, more just invigorating than it might be for the average person, because I can just picture these things. But I also could see where some of these interviews and some of these testimonials being put in front of people can bring these stories to life as well. And I'm excited, at the potential of that for you guys as well. Now, here's a question that I've asked in hundreds and hundreds of interviews, everyone from rock stars to CEOs.
Okay.
What do you wish people would ask you?
I guess my wish is that they would, not so much what they would ask, although, if they wanted to ask me what we could do for their child, or, do you think this program could be beneficial for my child? I'd love to be able to answer that question. Like I said before, our program's not for every child, but for the right kind of kids, you'll know it. And you're doing your child a big disservice not to look into it. So, one of my colleagues that would sit next to me, he'd always say, I'd be on the phone for an hour talking to parents, and he'd say, that's not a good use of your time. But I'm happy to talk. I love talking to parents, and I love talking to parents that have been in our program for a while. And, some parents ask me questions about college, where their kids should go to college. And again, as I told you, when my dad was going to go into retirement, our son was 2 years old. And since then we had a second child, but they both went through this program. And, one's an electrical engineer. He went his graduate degree at Stanford. The other just finished medical school, and he's starting his residency. And, any parent, what do you want? You want your kids to be happy. And both of my kids are happy. They had confidence. We give kids well-grounded confidence. And so I don't know if there's one question. I just think if you're a parent, you'd want to know, what can this program do for me, for my kids? And I could talk days about it. I would just say, come take our placement class and see, because your kid, when you come to me when your kid's in high school and they're struggling, there's not much I can do. But when they're young, I had a kid many years ago, a first grader, whose mom was going to stop after one session. And I said, well, why? She said, well, I don't really know that she's a math type person. And I said, oh my God, I've seen so much growth in just 8 weeks. And I said, how can you give up on her that young? 4 years later, I was at a awards ceremony for the Broward County Teachers of Mathematics for the brightest kids in Broward County. And I was giving awards to some of the kids, and this mom comes up and said, I don't know if you remember me, my daughter, Sarah, she's on the winning team at her. And she said, I'm so glad you convinced me to stay in. And I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. I kind of forgot about her, but yeah, parents are going to give up on their kids too quickly. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I love that answer. It's pretty simple, which is inquire into what could this do for my child, which means you care about the child's future. And also you could very easily be guided to that free class where you can get a dose and see. I love that. The potential of just checking something out, be a little curious, right? All right. This last part,
okay,
we'll go through quick. I like to take my time here, but it's still quick. I just want you to tell everyone where they can find you. So obviously we have the website, if there's any social media, even if I went to the kind of, I don't know what to call it. It's like the page on your website that shows a lot of the like articles and accomplishments and all that cool stuff. So anyway, feel free to mention anything you want, but where would you like people to go if they're watching this? Like, all right, I want to know more. You've convinced me. I want to see what my kid can do. Let's do it.
So if you have an elementary school age kid and you're interested in our enrichment level programs, which is the bulk, that's the heart of our programs, our main website is IMACS.org, and IMACS, it's not like the theater, it's IMACS.org, Institute for Math and Computer Science. And if you go to IMACS.org, if you put /start after it, you'll get to a page that will kind of walk you through how to sign up for this placement process, what the steps are, and how to get to the first 3 videos that I was talking about. If you're at our IMACS.org main site and you click on the success stories on the main page, you can read about Peyton and some of the other students that are there. There's about, I think, 30 some students that we've spotlighted over the years, because you'll see their picture when they first started with us back a lot of times in elementary school, and then their picture when they graduated high school or in college or whatever. And you can read what they took with us. They all have quotes about what a difference our program made and things like that. If your child's, already in middle school, they're probably too late for a math enrichment, maybe 6th grade, but certainly 7th and 8th. We do have these university level courses. If your child just happens to be one of those really super talented kids and you're looking for more challenge, we have a site called EIMACS, so E in front of IMACS, eimacs.com, and that's our university level courses. And then, like I said, our middle school math and high school programs called EMF, Elements of Math Foundations, emfmath.com. And and by the way, with the university level courses and the EMF math, there's free aptitude tests there. So kids can just do an aptitude test. It's kind of fun, just like all of our classes are, but it's different and it's challenging. And once they take that, we'll be able to let you know if your child's strong enough to jump into those higher level courses from the beginning.